If you have seen our channel before, then you know that we absolutely love Japanese guitars. There's so many cool Japanese guitar brands. Some of them are super well known, some of them are a little more niche, but I think we can all say that there was a time when we weren't as familiar with all these brands. So what we want to start doing is these videos where we kind of dive into a few brands that you may know, you may not know, and give you a little bit of a background, talk about the guitars they made and what they're doing now. If you're already super in the culture with the Japanese guitar brands, these crash courses might include a lot of information you already know, but there may also be something in here you don't know. So we're going to start that series today and talk about 3 of my favorite Japanese guitar brands. For once, I've actually put together a script here, so a lot of this I'm just gonna be reading from my notes here. The first brand we're gonna talk about today is Tokai, and they are one of my favorite guitar brands still making guitars today. Tokai started back in 1947 making pianos and harmonicas, which eventually evolved into acoustic guitars in the mid-1960s. In 1968, they released their first electric guitar called the Hummingbird, which is a pretty interesting name given the presence of the Gibson Hummingbird already at this time. I've never actually seen one of these Hummingbirds in person. They kind of give like Mosrite vibes, but they also look similar to like Teisco craftsmanship. Those can be a bit hit or miss, but they look cool and maybe we'll find one day. By the 1970s, Tokai would really start to find its own footing and even striking up a deal with Martin to produce a line of guitars called Sigma. You may have seen these before. These are kind of more budget-oriented Martin guitars that were made in Japan, and they were made by Tokai. You'll see Tokai do different things like this over the years where they become kind of the OEM manufacturer for a brand, and they make guitars with another brand on them. In 1978, Tokai began manufacturing a very accurate replica of the Gibson Les Paul Burst, a 1958 to 1960 Gibson Les Paul, under the name Les Paul Reborn. As you can probably imagine, that name didn't last very long, and by 1980, they had switched the name to the Reborn Old, and then eventually the Love Rock, which is what they still call this model today. As well as producing a fantastic line of Les Paul style and other Gibson style guitars, they also make a lot of Fender style guitars. They had a Telecaster under the Breezy Sounds name and a Stratocaster under the Springing Sounds name. I've mentioned it in some other videos, but some of these Fender style guitars Tokai was making in the 70s are really great value. They're like some of the coolest vintage guitars you can find out of the 70s, factoring in their quality, their collectability, and just overall playability. I think they're a really great value based on what they go for now. In order for Tokai to make these replica instruments so good in the 70s, they actually went and acquired a handful of proper vintage pieces from the 50s and 60s from both Gibson and Fender, including even a real Gibson Les Paul Burst. Tokai is still manufacturing a vast line of guitars today, but they are made almost exclusively for the Japanese market. These guitars are still really great, so anytime we have a chance to get our hands on one, we do. Whether new or old, I really enjoy the offerings that Tokai has had over the years, and they're easily one of my favorite Japanese guitar brands. Right now we are checking out this TLS 100 Tokai Love Rock. This is an earlier example from 1985 and is of course a recreation of the classic Les Paul Burst. This one's cool, it has a nice flame on it, and the neck profile is probably somewhere between 59 and 58 territory. It's kind of in that just right territory. It's definitely not slim. It's somewhat thick, but it's not like crazy thick like a 58. So I'm really, really enjoying this one. And this is very solid Japanese craftsmanship overall. I really enjoy how this example in particular is aged. Binding looks really accurate to kind of what you would expect on a Les Paul that is of this age. And the flame on the top is really, really nice. Even the plastics have kind of yellowed out a good bit, just like the binding. And this feels like a vintage Les Paul. While this is certainly not an inexpensive guitar, it's definitely at a fraction of the price of what this is kind of recreating. And I think if you put this up against other guitars in its price class, this is pretty impossible to beat. This is just really great for what it is. Lots of vintage vibe without a crazy vintage price. If you're shopping for a Tokai Love Rock, there's a pretty wide range of what's available out there. At the entry point of the Tokai Love Rock line, you'll see a lot of modern guitars that have a poly finish. I actually think these are still really great, and given their price, I think they're a really great value. They'll usually come in at a little more than an Epiphone would be, but still notably less than a Gibson would be. They do currently offer a lot of nitro finish guitars, which are also pretty special, but those will get a little pricier, and those will be in like a similar price range to a Gibson USA guitar. Given the attention to detail on these, I think it definitely warrants the price point. I know we've seen a lot more of the poly finish ones, but whether it's been a more affordable Love Rock or a higher end piece like this one, I've always been really impressed with the line, and I would check them out. In the world of Japanese-made Les Paul style guitars, Tokai is definitely one of the most iconic brands. But there's probably one brand that I hear about a little more than Tokai, and we're gonna talk about that one next. The next brand I wanna talk about today is another classic, and that is Greco guitars. Anytime a friend comes to me to talk about Japanese guitars, I feel like it's most likely that they start with Greco, whether it's like a Gibson style Greco or a Fender style Greco. That's kind of one of the things that I think a lot of people are drawn to early in their Japanese guitar journey, and for good reason. Greco was established in 1960 by the Kanda Shokai company. Initially, the Greco brand created its own unique guitar models, but by the 1970s, they started focusing on creating high quality recreations of some of the classic American guitars like Fender and Gibson models, which is probably what they're most known for today still. Some of the most iconic Greco models include their many EG and EGC Les Paul and Les Paul custom style guitars. They also made many different Stratocaster models sporting names like the Super Sound, Spacey Sound, and Superpower models. Greco also made a lot of great Telecaster style guitars, everything from a 50 style Tele to a even 72 style Tele Deluxe as early as 1974. They've also become quite well known for their SA series of guitars, which are like 335 semi-hollow body style guitars. Many of these guitars carried stock Maxon pickups, which sound absolutely incredible. Ibanez guitars are being made out of the Fujigen plant as well at the same time, so they have a lot of crossover with certain Ibanez models. Between their build quality, choice electronics, and great fretwork, these were known for just being really great guitars, and they still hold up really well today. Once again, Greco is another brand that we definitely look for when we are out looking for guitars. By 1982, Kanda Shokai and Fender reached a deal which would result in Fender guitars being made in the Fujigen plant and the Fender style Greco guitars being discontinued. We actually did a whole video on this, so if you want to hear more about that story, check it out. Greco would still make Gibson style guitars for years to come, and they're even still making guitars today, even though the more modern Grecos aren't as much like deliberate clones of some of the classic American stuff. They're definitely like finding their own designs now. This is one of my favorite Greco guitars that we've ever had. This is a 1974 TD500 or Telecaster Deluxe reissue. I think this guitar is really interesting because they didn't start making the Fender Telecaster Deluxe like this until 1972, but by 74, Greco was already making their own version. I actually own a 74 Tele Deluxe and then now playing this from the shop. They're both great in their own ways. This is definitely no less guitar than my 74 Fender is, but they are definitely different in their own ways. I think neck profile is where these are probably the most similar. These pickups definitely sound a bit different than Fenders, but I really like them for what they are, and they kind of do their own thing. This one's kind of interesting how the finish is. It's pretty light on the front here, but gets a little darker on the sides. And then once again, light on the back. You'll of course see the Made in Japan branding back there. Overall, very solid Telecaster Deluxe, and as I kind of said with the Tokai, very good value for its money. Greco has once again a very wide product offering, though most of the guitars like this you see are no longer offered today, and the best examples you're gonna find are those of the 70s or even the 80s. I definitely way prefer the older Grecos to what they're making now. There's definitely some cool models for sure, but this is pretty unbeatable. This is cool, and a lot of the Greco Les Paul style guitars we've had are also very cool as well. Fender style Greco guitars like this one would stop being produced in 1982 when the Kanda Shokai company made a deal with Fender to start manufacturing Fender Japan guitars, and that leads us to the last brand that we're going to talk about today. The last brand we're going to talk about today is Fender Japan, which is probably the most well-known of every single Japanese guitar brand. As we just talked about, in 1982, Fender made an agreement with the Kondo Shokai company, which would see Fender guitars produced outside of the US for the first time. Fender would start making some of their guitars in the Fujigen factory in Japan. Now, Fender is a US company, so why are we talking about a US company in a Japanese guitar video? Fender Japan basically operates as its own company. Most of the stuff that they make today is exclusive for the Japanese market. We will get a FSR run of Fender Japan stuff here in the States here and there, and Europe will also get some stuff, but the high majority of Fender Japan's models are exclusive to the Japanese market. Throughout the years, Fender Japan would produce a wide variety of high quality guitars carrying the Made in Japan branding. In the mid-90s, the branding was changed to Crafted in Japan when Dynagaki started taking on some of the production. These CIJ era guitars are still excellent quality and some of my favorite guitar models ever produced. By 2007, the branding was changed back to Made in Japan while still carrying the same serial format as before, so this actually led to a lot of overlap on the serial numbers, so dating these 2007 to 2010 Japan guitars can be a bit tough. But by 2012, they completely changed the serial number format and started going with a JD plus 8-digit serial format, which is their easiest to read by far, as it's just JD and then the first two numbers are the year. We love the JD serial format. Makes things nice and easy. When comparing Fender Japan to Fender Mexico to Fender US, Fender Japan is by far currently producing the best selection of offset guitars. Fender Japan almost always has a comprehensive selection of offset guitars, from Mustangs to Jaguars to Jazzmasters. They have vintage style stuff, they have modern style stuff, and honestly, everything that I've played from them has been really, really great. Fender Japan is probably the most consistent when it comes to quality when comparing Fender's different lines. Obviously, Fender US is still their flagship, but Fender Japan is kind of right there with them. Fender Mexico is, of course, creating some great stuff still, and definitely creating some cool guitars to a price point. But I think once you get into this Japanese guitar range, the quality definitely goes up quite a bit. The wealth of information online on Fender Japan is very vast, so we definitely can't get to everything in this video. This is supposed to just be some quick stuff, but the history of Fender Japan is really interesting, and it's just so cool to see them making such high quality guitars throughout pretty much their entire lineage. From 1982 in the JV era stuff, to the Crafted in the Japan era stuff, to the modern JD prefix stuff. I think it's all really great, and we've documented a bunch of those guitars on the channel, so after you watch this video, definitely check out some of our others featuring Fender Japan guitars. This Strat is a Fender traditional 50s Stratocaster FSR. It's a special run because it has the competition stripe, but this is otherwise a pretty straight up 50s reissue Strat. This is kind of what I think Fender Japan does best, which is they do these really cool FSR guitars pretty frequently actually, where they have some spec that's not exactly traditional, but is still like classic in its own way. In this case, this is a 50s Strat, but you'll see a comp stripe like you would see on like a late 60s or early 70s Mustang. You would never, of course, see that on a 50s Strat from the factory, but I think this is kind of a cool blend of two different vintage things. The neck profile on this one is super comfy. It's very much like a full C. It's not crazy thick or anything like that, but definitely thicker than you would see on a 60s reissue style Strat. I know I've said a version of this with all these guitars, but the craftsmanship on this really is second to none. This is right there with anything Fender US would do. Being that this sports a poly finish, the price range on this is going to be a little less than you'd see on like an American vintage guitar that was sporting nitro. But Fender Japan actually currently offers a line that has nitro, which is their Heritage collection. Those are pretty hard to find, but we do get them from time to time, and they're kind of right there with the American vintage line. I definitely see why they don't bring those over to the US. Overall, this is a great straight ahead Strat with a very cool aesthetic upgrade with the comp stripe. And it's definitely a great example of why I love Fender Japan. Thank you guys so much for hanging out with us today. Had a lot of fun playing these guitars and doing the research on some of these companies. It's always so interesting when I go to do research for these videos. I think I'll know a lot about a brand, and then I'll do some research and find some fun fact that I'd never heard before. I definitely want to do more videos like this, especially on different Japanese guitar brands. So if there is a brand in particular you'd like us to talk about, please leave it down below in the comments. And I look forward to reading your suggestions. Quick plug, we do have a pretty large selection of Japanese made guitars on our website at flashphotoguitars.com. fendergear.com. So if you are in the market, we would love if you took the time to check out our site. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, and all that good stuff, and we will see you in another video soon. Bye.